self-driving electric car being more or less an apartment or pod that can go anywhere. Of course, I can see that happen. I mean, in theory, you could make it today. But again, I think we really have to distinguish in what type of environment is it. So if it's going from, I don't know, a trans-Siberic office, it's not going to disturb anyone. It's perfect. But if you are in a city, it's a problem, right? A lot of kind of anti-car movement, so to say, has been about environmentalism. But even let's say you did not believe that there's any issue around there, then the most important, just from a strictly transportation point of view, is a flow of people. How many people can flow from A to B within X amount of time? So that's kind of that throughput is what you strictly speaking need to optimize. With bikes, you can have a lot of bicycles, right? If you have one car, you probably have room for 10 bikes there, right? So there was this study at MIT many years ago now, and they looked at if you did that to make cars as efficient as you would with, let's say, buses or bicycles, you would actually end up with having to have at least 6 people in there. So, and you never have 6 people in cars, right? There, on average, you have one and a half, right? Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying that the problem with these driverless cars is that even though you can make a lot of things efficient, but the problem is that you don't need a driver. So actually, from now having one and a half person, on average, you could end up actually having half a person in the car, right? And you might say, instead of parking, I don't want to pay for parking, just drive around until I come back, right? Or now my dog needs to go to the hairdresser, and you put your dog in there, and the car drives the dog. And, so you end up in a situation where you could have, each have 3 cars out there just driving around without any people in it. And so that for cities would be like the worst thing that could happen.
This is the future.
Hello and welcome to Alternate Futures Beyond Fiction, where we chat with the people shaping the technologies, systems, and ideas that may define tomorrow. I'm your host, Edwin Rydberg, and today I'm joined by Jens Martin Skibsted. Jens Martin is a driving force behind sustainable design, urban mobility, and the future of entrepreneurship. His portfolio includes shaping BiOmega's distinct vision for e-mobility, which includes cutting-edge lightweight e-bikes built on the principles of Danish design, advanced tech, and genuine sustainability. Given his leadership on the World Economic Forum's Global Futures Council on entrepreneurship and experience as a former vice chair of the WEF's Global Agenda Council on Design and Innovation, Jens Martin has a unique perspective on what fuels meaningful change in cities, business, and climate action. He's contributed ideas everywhere from TED to the Harvard Business Review. But what truly sets him apart is how he links creativity, strategic impact, and the realities of building better systems for the future. Hi, Jens Martin. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess the first thing is you are Danish, and you base a lot of your design ideas around the sort of Danish and in fact, I guess you could almost argue Northern European design philosophies. But first, I guess I'm of Swedish ancestry, but I haven't yet traveled much in Northern Europe. So I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, if I get to Denmark, what are a few things I should have on my to-do list?
Well, actually, the tourist guides in Denmark are a kind of they're good. So you can actually follow the tourist guide. Often people will tell you that it's filled with traps. However, the Little Mermaid you can easily avoid. I've never understood why that's on there. But I think pretty much how people live. I mean, one thing that startles foreigners that come by is strollers laying with kids sleeping outside, because it's good for them with fresh air, and to to places where kids would be put in danger by being outside, that you know that comes as a surprise. But I think it's very emblematic for the level of trust there is, right? So it's very safe and people trust each other. So things are fairly smooth because you don't need to be at guard all the time.
Yeah, that was interesting because during COVID, when Sweden kind of came on the world's radar, that was one of the things that was brought out sometimes, that the Swedes also leave their strollers outside with their kids in them as well. Yeah, we wouldn't dream of doing that over here, but
No, there was actually a story of a Danish woman that got arrested that sat where the kid was just outside her window and she was inside the cafe, but the baby was outside and she actually got arrested and the baby taken for her from her for a few days and so on. So I know it's not culturally the same.
yeah, child safeguarding is, in my opinion, a little bit overboard here. But yeah, each culture has its own, I guess. I am humbled because we're almost exactly the same age. I'm in fact 4 weeks older than you. But but you've had a pretty amazing career in design thinking, co-founding multiple companies. You've been on advisory boards of the World Economic Forum. You've got your bike designs in Danish museums. So I've got to ask you, is there something you wish you'd been able to achieve but still haven't?
I've been asked that before, and I haven't danced enough. I think that's my my answer. I would have liked to just be let myself go loose a little bit more. But in terms of career, at some point I became a single dad alone with my kids, and that kind of changed my perspective a lot. So in terms of career, I got suddenly way less ambitious, and I've actually thrived in that.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it? But I suppose when you can step back and take the time to relax, you can then fill the time you have with the highest priority things you have to do, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I mean, it's in a way, it's a fortunate situation because you know that the kids' priorities are so important. So you get to know your own priorities, and then you got to be fairly clever about how you spend that little time that's left.
Yeah, and with kids, of course, they have to take priority. There's no point in having kids if they're not your priority, are they?
Yeah, totally, totally.
Yeah. So what would you say is your proudest achievement then?
Ooh, that's a good question. I haven't thought of that, but probably I think the BiOmega bikes. They when the BiOmega bikes were launched, there was no kind of design bicycle category as such. I mean, of course, there were beautiful bikes, but not like this category like you have designer clothes or you didn't have that category for bikes. So creating that category, I think, is one of the things that I'm proud of, and that's also why I was fortunate to be invited in these different forums. TED and World Economic Forum, etc., was basically because if you had to talk to the guy who did this, there was only one at that point, right? So I got seated next to people that were compared to me complete overachievers. So it kind of like really boosted my voice and career.
Right. Well, I was debating whether to leave this later, but since you brought up the World Economic Forum, I was quite curious what it was like to be involved in that. And sort of did they contact you looking for people involved in entrepreneurship and sort of design thinking on future mobility? How did that come about?
So it came about that I was in an advisory board for Index, which at that point was the world's largest in terms of the biggest lump sum that was handed as a prize, largest design prize. And in there, it turned out that there was also the one who, the woman who kind of curated their innovation and design think tank. And I just helped her with a bunch of stuff. I advised her who she should put in there. Well, I didn't advise her to take me. And then she ended up asking them to select me as what they call a young global leader. I'm not young anymore, and I'm an alumni. And then I once I got in there, she could bring me on board into that think tank, and working, the other ones were more obvious choices. So they had kind of more lean back where I really had to work for it. And I think because I basically made things happen, eventually I got to be the vice chair. And at some point I had been so long in these think tanks that the people from World Economic Forum could actually use me just by having that experience doing that job. So that's when they started moving me around into mobility, into entrepreneurship, etc.
So I'm curious, like the general experience, sort of the interpersonal environment, I guess, there, and did it really sort of kickstart your career in a way, or the development of your businesses, being, sort of surrounded by people in that type of mindset?
I was always I always wanted to be the best in the world at what I did. So I was already and for some reason, I really believed in it that I was gonna. So when people asked me, "Weren't you surprised this and this happened?" I was like, "No, no, I kind of knew it." So I was maybe almost overly optimistic, but it did change the fact that I thought I could actually somehow contribute positively to the world. That it was not just a business, but I could actually somehow make the world a better place. Oh, of course, not me alone, but contribute to moving the needles a slight bit in a better direction. And so the great thing about their think tanks is that they have many think tanks in parallel. So often, if you have a think tank, you have some thinkers with some kind of a aim or speciality, expertise, or whatever, and then they meet that form of people. And it can be smaller or larger, but it will be them. Whereas the World Economic Forum had at some point up to 80 different think tanks, and we would meet. We wouldn't sit, all together in one room. We would have our little cubicles, but we could potentially go around and exchange and cross-pollinate. So that was very special. You had people specializing in faith or geopolitics or extractive economies or specific geographies. So that type of cross-pollination was really extraordinary.
That's really interesting because so I'm curious, was that at Davos, that whole thing? Because it feels like our impression, the little people in the rest of the world, the impression is, the elites go to Davos and have their meeting for a week every year. So this kind of cross-pollination of think tanks and as you described, was that in the Davos setting, or do they have facilities around the world?
So it's an NGO, World Economic Forum, and they have a year. Well, they actually have two yearly meetings. They have one in China, which is of more recent date, which is less prestigious, but it's also important. Then you have the Davos, which is the glitzy one. It's really good if you want to meet VIPs. They're all there, right? But it also, what happens when all of the VIPs come is that it becomes slightly superficial and very glitzy. It's about who you saw and after parties and all of that kind of. So it's a fun scene, and of course, if you have that one connection that will change everything, this is the right place. But then they have different, so then they have per continent, they have meetings per continent. And then they have these think tanks, and they have these different forum of young global leaders, of business leaders, and they have different times and places they meet. And these think tanks, they would usually be in the Emirates in November, and that's where all of these think tanks congregated.
Okay. Um, so I'm curious because for most people, I think the World Economic Forum really came on the world stage with their unfortunate "you'll own nothing and be happy" advertisement during COVID,
Oh yeah.
which which was rather ill-timed. Um, And that relates to the sort of 2030 agenda with the UN sustainability goals. Um, as far as you're aware, I mean, I don't know if you've been involved in the WEF very much lately, but is that still on track, that whole Agenda 2030, especially considering the chaos of this decade?
I mean, what happened during COVID was that things got we met digitally, and to for me personally, it kind of killed the experience because it was very much this about meeting someone and hey, let's do this together. And when you speak digitally, I mean, when the two of us have a conversation, it's not a problem because I know when I'm speaking, you're not, and vice versa. But if we were 20 on this call, it would be or in this studio or whatever, it would be it wouldn't really work. So now it's a lot of it is digitized. So I've kind of withdrawn because of that, because you have to take turns to say things, and then it become, you know. But I mean, last I was involved was the was just before King Charles became, it was Prince Charles and became King Charles, and that was a really interesting initiative, which basically was about the sustainability, sustainable market initiative. It was called, about creating kind of boosting yeah, markets for sustainability. So you could say that's also part of a 2030 agenda, but you know, it's so all encompassing that you could probably say that about most things. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's true. I was just wondering there, because you mentioned, and I'm sure you're not the only one to note this, the challenge of video conferencing. Um, and I mean, you're a designer. Have you thought about trying to design something better? There have been groups. So I looked into this during COVID, and there was a number of companies that had put forward various options. And one of them was quite interesting because you could actually design on the screen a convention center that you could walk around with your character, and as you came in range of a person, their screen would then light up and their feed would trigger. Um, but at the same time, there were also private spots where you could go and you could meet someone and you could sit down, like quote, sit down in the chairs, and then you'd be in a private chatting bubble. So it was much more organic than the usual video conferencing. Do you think there's a solution to that? Because in the book, you sometimes talk about VR, and I think you may have written some articles about sort of using VR in the future as well. This is not VR. This was a video chat, but there is potential there.
Yeah, I think that that's things are really will change, right? Because things, I think people are a little bit tired of this experience. Uh, but exactly how, I don't know yet. I actually know someone from that I know from the forum, and she's part of a startup from the Bay Area in the US, where they are looking at exactly these type of things. You know, do you want to decide what type of environment, you know, the graphics around these characters? It's, you know, like the so the I think it's going to happen. The interesting thing will be also, I think if you could, but that's true also for science fiction, and it's true for everything. If you can get the olfactory part digitized, right? Once we can smell things, we can go from audiovisual or audiovisual to something else, then a lot of things will change. That's going to be super interesting.
Yeah, interesting is one word for it, I guess. I'm not so sure if I look forward to that or not. Yeah, you can see very positives, but also some negatives there as well.
Yeah, it could also be horrible. That's true. Hopefully, you can switch it on and off.
Yeah, could you imagine having your young kids at home or something on a video? Anyway, one last question on the WEF, and this is again relating to sort of the um, negative perception of them, because there is the view of WEF being elites that kind of want to globally manage the world and don't necessarily involve the average person in that. And I'm just curious your experience in that. Was that something that you noticed, um, ever discussed? Was
So
there an attitude there, or is it not at all?
yeah, so there is this kind of there are two kind of preconceptions about them, right? One is it's just a bunch of rich guys. The other one is just talking heads. So with the first one, so yes, it is elitist, but it's actually it's trying to be very multi-stakeholder. So you could be elite in many different things. So business is just one tiny slice, right? So if you could be within, I think I already mentioned religious community. You could be within tech community. You could be successful under 30. You could be, so they have many different categories. An important person from an NGO, or so it's a little bit more like the UN in the sense that it's very political. Everybody has their agenda, and they want their agenda to the foreground. So, but of course, yeah, they need to, they try to cherry pick, but it's not just that one type of profile. If you go to TED, it's much more kind of a specific demographic that go there, right? It's not, it's much broader here. In the kind of, let's say, talking heads bit, or I don't know if that's the right expression, but there's a lot of talk and less doing. That, of course, it is a challenge for them because if you have these kind of elites, often they're fairly busy people. So now ask them to go out and do it, right? It's like, yeah, I'm actually busy doing something else, right? So sometimes it works well if you're head of an academic, university, you can ask someone in the university to do it, or if you're head of a big enterprise, you can ask someone in the business to do it for you. But they do, of course, struggle with how do all of these great things, and I mean great, not as in quote unquote, but they do actually have some great ideas. How do you implement those? That is a challenge. The best thing that they can do, which they always do, is they make sure the right people actually see these findings. But then if they actually carry them out or not, that is more difficult for them to control.
So I wanted to return now back to, well, you, and we go back to BiOmega. So you mentioned that was one of your proud moments, and maybe you could take us through sort of, so BiOmega is a bike company. That's very simplistic term version of it, which you started in 1998, I think it was. And I was wondering if you could sort of walk us through sort of what the process for what the thinking was behind the development of that company. Because I did see in one video that you started as a kind of anti-car activist or something. You described yourself as yelling at cars and things like that. So I was wondering if you could walk us through sort of the development of BiOmega, and then sort of how it's evolved and what its goals are.
Yeah, so I was pro bikes in the cities. I was not very like a typical person that go to demonstrations and so on, but I actually did take part in these. You would have different cities in Europe where you would have thousands of bikes going through the streets and kind of promoting bicycles. It was not very feisty, it was more like people having fun and so on. But that was very much kind of the culture there was around urban cycling. So it was very much about making it practical and having some kind of political aim if you had that inclination. And BiOmega was something that actually happened slightly intuitively. I mean, I had that interest with bikes, so it wasn't completely coincidental, but I was traveling with a girlfriend when I was young, and we were traveling in Barcelona. And in Barcelona, you have all of these modernist buildings. Gaudi is the most, Antonio Gaudi is the most known of them, but they have a host of these contemporary modernist, and it just struck me how not only beautiful they were, but how actually they served a positive and productive purpose in the city. So they're not just fluff, they're actually beautiful architecture that makes the cities more livable. And I was thinking, so what about bikes? We could also do that for bikes. And that's when I started drawing bikes to my girlfriend's annoyance, because that was not why she had gone to Barcelona. Um, and um, and from there, I actually tried to forget about it, because I get so many ideas. So that okay, then I'll just buy one of these designer bikes. And I thought, okay, there's actually no such bike. Then I thought, okay, I'll read about them. Then I couldn't really find such a book, and it just little by little, this over some years, I found out, okay, there's just a category, designer city bikes, that does not exist. And then I was studying philosophy back then, and I asked a friend of mine who had a sandwich bar. So I thought, okay, if he has a sandwich bar, he must be a good business guy. So I asked him, hey, why don't we make this bike company together? And so with him, I started BiOmega. Um, and then it took shape. But the idea was that instead of trying to wean people off their bikes, we would try and make something more attractive than the cars. So if you look at it, of course, this depends how spread out the city. If you have Detroit, getting from one end to the other on a bike is not ideal on a bicycle, right? Whereas a car actually lends itself well to that. But in many European cities, the city centers are small and extremely clogged, right? Which is actually true also for the East Coast in the US. They're built more around horse carriages, and all of a sudden you have all of these cars that fill them up. Um,
That sounds a little bit like the UK, to be honest. Our roads are so narrow here.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly like the UK, and then the idea was that the bikes are already practical. So they are already. If you look in Europe, they are during rush hour 30% faster on average than cars. So you're already faster. You already cost much less. You're already healthier. You just go through the list of things. There are very few aspects where from a practical aspect, that the car will come ahead of the bike. So my conclusion was, it was not about that. So it was about communicating who you are as like what lifestyle are you? And their cars are extremely good at doing that. So if I tell you I have a 4x4, you might not really know what kind of character I have. But if I tell you that I have, let's say, a Range Rover or a Hummer or a Land Rover, whatever, take Lada Niva, take any 4x4 that has the exact same function or more or less the same function, it reflects totally different personalities. So that granularity in lifestyle, cars have and bicycles do not. And so that's what I thought. If we can actually get people to project, or city dwellers that like to project their lifestyle, to do that with a bicycle, we will get more bikes in the city.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see there's definitely an attitude issue for sure. Like over here, I mean, I like to ride my bike when I'm going into volunteer around the community, etc. Like I do a lot of work in the library, things like that. If I'm meeting people for business in the center, because I'm only about 2 miles away, so it's quite a simple drive. But a lot of the people I speak with here, you get the impression that bikes are just either for recreation or for kids, right? So they don't really consider biking as a regular daily commute type thing, which is unfortunate because this is a perfect town for it if it was set up properly, right? But you almost, if you want to follow the rules, because in England there's quite strict road rules for bikes. and you're not theoretically supposed to ride on certain paths, etc. Um, so if you want to follow the rules, you're quite often taking your life in your hands riding a bike. I mean, we have a very congested small town here, well, medium town, and it's pretty horrible. But yet there's potential for really good bike paths. I haven't visited Northern Europe much, but I did visit the Netherlands once, visit friends there, and that was an amazing experience for cycling. I really love that the way they had the paths all laid out and the nice surface and everything. And I would love to see something like that here, but there just seems to be no will to do it at almost any level. I mean, obviously cyclists would like it, but but I mean, how do you begin changing that? Like it's I mean, obviously there's perception like you were saying about style and representing yourself, but there's also these very practical sides to it as well, that need to be changed. Like we have massive congestion because of a few major roads, and that leads to those roads being completely blocked up. Now, if you're a bike, you can sneak around that, like you said, at rush hour,
Yeah.
except you're not supposed to use a lot of the paths that you would like to use, right?
Oh, okay, okay.
Everyone does anyway.
Yeah,
But
okay.
then certain people yell at you when they're walking and stuff. But I mean, it could be laid out so easy, so well, and yet there's always this resistance to it. How do you start by getting around that?
Yeah, so of course there need to be some democratic will. I mean, if you take New York, they actually went ahead and asked a Danish architect to lay out their cycleways or their bike path, and the so that's kind of one philosophy. It's a little bit if you put a lot of fiber. Eventually, people will start using videos and video games, and so you put in the capacity, and then people will fill it up. So that's kind of that philosophy. If you take Denmark and the Netherlands, it actually happened the other way around, where where people just increasingly started biking. So yeah, I think maybe it's important to say that with both the Netherlands and Denmark, you imagine that well, you guys always cycled, which in a way is true, but it stopped actually. So if you at some point bikes were about to get eradicated, or eradicated, but like very few of them, like the rest of Europe and the Western Hemisphere, and uh, but then they started coming again. Also, when the oil prices went up and so on, people thought, that's practical, and so they just slowly grew, and as they grew, they put in bike path, and it kind of like was more organic. um yeah, but I think now with all of these things that if you look of the healthcare system, it's gotten so costly, also because we can treat more things and we have more elderly people, etc. So bringing making people healthy makes healthcare costs go down. So a lot of public sectors are very motivated to get people over on their bikes, um, because they become healthier. But also, let's say with carbon emissions, they want to bring down the exhaust, and there again, bikes can do that. So there are some outside of let's say popular demand. There are also other motivating factors that I think brings us in that direction.
Yeah, because I was gonna say if you don't have the dedicated paths for bikes, so like if you're if you're riding amongst the cars, I'm not so sure it's healthier because I did see a study done in London, I think, a few years ago, which was talking about the amount of fumes that a person takes in, and cycling, I think, was the worst.
Oh,
Typically because you're driving like right in amidst the vehicles. So I'm curious if there's a way. I mean, I have mask. I don't use it very often, but a filter basically, because we do have some paths, but everything's potholed here anyway. So, um, but so how do you deal with the practical? Yeah,
That,
go
that
ahead.
actually surprises me, but of course, I believe that you've seen that. But there often comes data from different sides, and without really seeing it, it's difficult to understand. Seeing it concretely, but the data that I've seen has a different picture. That because the intake of air with cars is actually roughly at the same level as the exhaust. Actually, the worst place to be is in a car because you suck all the thing from the car in front of you directly into the cabin. Um, Whereas you as a cyclist are at a different height and therefore receive much less. Um, so yeah, that's the data I've seen.
I suppose it might depend on nuances on whether you're rush hour or not, whether you have your vents open in the car or not for your air
Yeah.
conditioning on instead. Yeah, it's probably a lot of issues there. I was wondering, how do you manage some of the other issues? So one of the things with bikes is obviously, okay, it's good exercise if you do it regularly, but there are some limitations. It's very difficult to take all of your work with you sometimes. You can't really take your shopping with you. That would be nice if you could like, especially so where I live, um, we have a half an hour walk to three major grocery stores, actually four major grocery stores, and an hour walk to two more.
Hmm.
So cycling, that's nothing basically, right? 5, 10 minutes casual bike ride. Now, if you could go there and back quickly and easily and bring your shopping with you on your bike, that would be very convenient. But a bicycle doesn't seem to be very good for that. And I was wondering if there's design ideas, maybe like tricycles or quadricycle, like bicycle-like structures. They're lightweight, easy to manipulate, but more functional as well.
So they do exist, and in Denmark, if you take, or not Denmark as such, because you've also got places where you actually need to go big distances in the countryside. But let's say in the major cities, where the distances are not that elevated, you a young person today that let's say moves in for the first time with his or her boy or girlfriend, and maybe they are starting to plan for a family, etc. They will tend to not buy a car, so they will have a bike each, like a bicycle each, and then they will have a cargo bike. They might be part of some sharing scheme with cars so they can go somewhere in the weekend if they want, but otherwise it's mainly going to be they're going to have three bikes basically. There are two personal and a third, which is kind of a family one, which is a cargo bike. And the cargo bikes today are almost exclusively electric, and they have three wheels. And there they will use that to put their kids in, to drive them to school. They will use it to take the groceries, and so these solutions exist, and I think you're going to see much more of it, right? So it's because um, a lot of people are kind of posing this as two-wheelers versus four-wheelers, but I think what's happening again, this is like dense cities I'm talking about, is you see that the cars are getting smaller and smaller because otherwise you don't go anywhere. Um, and some of they're even starting to make three-wheel cars, and because otherwise they get shut out because it takes so long to get anywhere. And you see bikes getting bigger and bigger because they want to have that family, they want to have that groceries. Some even want a roof. So somehow there's this middle ground that's almost converging. Um, kind of a three-wheeler space, if you like. So I think that's going to be important. But I think, the thing that's really beautiful about a bicycle is that it's so incredibly efficient. Right? So it's the machine where you put the least energy in to get the most energy out. And like by far, there's unless you have some specific microbe or something, there's nothing as efficient in nature either. It's really like it's a testament to mankind's genius, right? A wheel, we didn't find it in nature. We made that wheel. We made the bike. We made and what happened in the evolution of bicycles is that at some point around it was around World War One, a little bit before, a little bit after. The main racing sport was bikes. These big velodromes. You didn't have Formula One, so the big speed thing were these bikes. And so like Formula One, there's a lot of money in it, and in general, if you see the development of the bicycle is very sports driven, because that's where the money was. What then at some point, some of these racers realized if they made a recumbent instead, they would be much faster. So simply because there's much less air drag when you start riding over 20 miles per hour or something. From there on, actually the main challenge propulsing yourself is air drag. So a recumbent is way more efficient. So of course, the recumbents started winning these races, and the UCI, the cycle union, which was placed in Paris, led by a bunch of old men. One of them took a recumbent bike in there and biked around and showed them, what is this? These are winning, and they knew it was because of the bike they were winning, because they could see the same riders before and after they rode these, and they said, this is not a bike, and they shot out the recumbent. So the bikes we see actually on the streets are kind of a very inefficient. They're hugely efficient compared to other things, but not compared to what a bicycle could have been or is if you still want to buy these recumbents. So there's a lot of room for improvement in there. And if you take the recumbents, they have something. Well, I think today they call them something else, but HPVs, which stands for human powered vehicles with fairing. I think today they call them velomobile, but it's basically a recumbent bike with this fairing around you, and it looks like a bullet. And the wind resistance of that is less than the side shield of your the side view mirror of your car. So there's like almost zero resistance. They can go so incredibly fast. So the world record is above 70 miles per hour, right, on a bike. So just to say, if we want to think of a future with super efficient bikes where you don't get rain on and all of that, the technology is out there. You just gotta, use it.
Yeah, I was wondering, are electric bikes as efficient as regular bikes?
So that's a good question, and not 100%. Of course, if you let's say if you, instead of driving with a chain, drove by wire, then they would be very inefficient. But they are driven by a chain, and then an electromotor, of course. But the thing is that since these assist ones are mainly driven by the chain, and because you don't need as much energy to drive them, because basically, so you eat less stuff. They actually have, in terms of CO2, roughly the same output. So and what happens is that people tend to ride. So they roughly, you spend roughly 70% of the energy, right? So if you have 100% energy on driving a bike, if you go on an electric bike, you only spend 70% of that. Uh, uh, but of course, an electromotor is never as efficient. But in terms of CO2, because you then don't dispense the same energy, eat less. And then, of course, it depends what you eat. If you eat a lot of steaks, then it's really good. It might be an advantage. If not, then yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
anyway, it's not clear cut. That's
yeah, fair enough. Because it is interesting to think that, I mean, one of the advantages electric bikes would have, obviously, over electric cars is the weight,
Mm.
which is a big issue for electric cars in terms of, well, everything basically, isn't it? Road
Yeah.
wear, tire wear, amount of fuel they need, and everything. So yeah, no, I mean, I'd be definitely in favor of electric bikes as being or even bikes and reg in general as being the main form of transportation within, especially a town like I live. I'm curious with the bullet bikes as you were describing them. Um,
Yeah.
once you get going that fast, like I can just imagine on the streets here. But what about the braking, for example?
Yeah,
Does that,
so these are,
yeah,
of course, the bikes I'm talking about are equivalent to, let's say again, the Formula One, right? I mean, you're
right.
not gonna take a Formula One car on the street; it would be lethal. And and the same with these bikes; these are dangerous. But if you take like a normal recumbent or a three-wheel recumbent with some fairing and so on, then actually they're not dangerous. It depends how low you go, but normally the height you will be in is at the same height as a car driver. So actually, sometimes you feel safer because you can look into the driver's eyes, like you also do when you drive a car, and see if he or she has seen you. So it does. But in terms of braking, it's actually much more safe because you can like if you take and brake maximum with a car, then the car is still going to be stable. Whereas a bike, if you brake the maximum, so I think it's almost 80% of the braking force that comes on the front wheel. If you clam both down, which means that would mean if you came in very high speed and you just and you would just press the brakes as hard as you could, you would fly over and into something, right? Like your it would tip. And in a recumbent bike, that's not the case because you have the weight behind, so you can actually jam those brakes without having that effect of falling over. So they actually, and if you, let's say you still don't manage to brake, if you bang into that thing, you will do it with your legs first, which hurts less than having your head first.
All right. That's true. Yeah. Um, so I'm still interested in the changes that are required as well. First of all, I was curious because you mentioned the trend towards larger bikes and smaller cars, and like many things, maybe I feel like the UK might be going backwards. Although there definitely is a trend for larger bikes here, but I think it's largely driven by the delivery people. So we see what look almost like mini motorbikes. They're electric bikes with really, really big tires. On the other hand, in the UK, at least up here, there definitely seems to be a trend towards larger cars, which is bizarre because you are correct in that the roads don't support them. I mean, there's not space for them, so people park on the sidewalks basically, and leaving a tiny, path through the middle, and they kind of have to leapfrog each other as they're going through It's really weird. Um, so I don't know, maybe England's just weird that way or something.
No, but I think you're right that they are both things are happening at the same time, right? So I mean, people are so much richer now than when we were kids, right? So nobody's gonna impressed if I tell them I have a color TV. So the things we have, we can just afford so many more things, and I'm not talking about specifically upper class, and inequality and all of that. I'm just saying, broadly speaking, people can afford more, and so if you can afford to a big car, and you can afford to kind of project this, and you can afford to put your whole family in and log it. So it's true, people buy bigger cars, but then at the same time, your second car might be the one that then shrinks to actually be able to get through the smaller streets in the big city. But again, if you live in a rural setting, or let's say peri-urban or suburban setting, it's very different from if you're in a center, right? So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Another thing I'm I can see in England. Actually, it's oddly enough, it was funny that it was something similar was mentioned on Top Gear, the car show. So competing, but the idea of theft in the UK, Scandinavia seems to be, at least from the outside, relatively well behaved. Whereas over here, you could just imagine your bikes being stolen constantly.
I mean, stealing bikes is definitely a problem. And it's a problem not just because you don't want to have your stuff stolen. I mean, in the beginning in Denmark, stealing a bicycle, when they started to come out, what was like stealing a man's horse, which meant you would be sentenced to death.
Wow. Okay.
That has changed. And so now it's just seen as a thing valued X, and often, it's not that they're very expensive. So like you're not punished in a way that really reflects how big harm it actually does to your life to remove your mobility.
Mm.
So there's a bit of that to it too, I would say. Um, but it's especially a problem. I mean, it's a problem for everybody, because then you need to buy a new one, etc. And maybe the insurance doesn't cover much of it, and so on. But especially for those who are beginners, that is really a huge problem, because you have statistics showing that if you decide, okay, now I'm going to start biking to work instead of using the car, and I think, let's say within 6 months it's stolen, then a lot of these people just abandon this. Okay, no, we're not going to bike, and that's really a problem for the uptake, is these people stealing bikes. Yeah.
Right. Um, so I was going to move on to sort of more general mobility in a moment, but one last question then. So we've kind of discussed sort of the build it and they will come idea of starting this out. But if you had a 3-point approach to try and convince a local council to put more effort into creating bike paths and bike friendly transportation within the community, what would you start with?
I mean, I would definitely for it. It really, I don't know which bills they pick up, because that's different from country to country. But if they pick up the health bill, that's I think that's really where you get a lot of bang for the buck. You can basically plaster an entire country with bike path, and you'll save money, right? If you're the one paying the health bill this week, because it really drastically increases health, for a ton of reasons. But not only because you then start moving, and because you get more fresh air and so on, but also because every time you bike, a thing that pollutes is taken out of the equation.
Right.
So I think I'll definitely focus on that. Then like emissions, I think is also like hugely important. I mean, yeah, it just drastically reduces emission, and also compared to electric cars, it's true electric cars have no emission, but the the process that goes into actually building them, and the batteries and that whole infrastructure, takes also a lot of CO2, which you have very little of compared to that with a bike. So I think definitely reducing emissions, if that was their concern, I would also point to that. But then I think also I would point to kind of the let's say social slash being equitable, right? So when you're almost everybody can afford a bike, and when you're standing there at the red light, you will speak with your neighbor, which you will not in a car because you simply cannot. And there is this side of kind of creating some social cohesion just by making choosing a form of transport everybody can afford, and where people actually get to chat and talk and hear the birds chirp, etc.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's interesting because it does pretty much tick every box, and yet, so we've got like in the UK, obviously we've got healthcare financing issues. They're starting to bring in AI now, interestingly,
Oh,
in there. Yeah. So I know people in the healthcare service. Um, and obviously emissions, so net zero. And so if it ticks all the boxes, and yet the governments are only talking about electric vehicles, basically. Is it just because there's not enough people talking about bikes, do you think?
I really think so, because but at the same time, if you look, I mean, now I haven't seen the latest data, so it could have changed. But last time I looked at it, they were selling 100 times more electric bikes than electric cars. So the electric cars in Europe. So electric cars are very visible, and people talk about them. Hey, should we do that instead of the combustion car? Blah blah blah. And cars have always been really good at kind of attracting attention. Like people will know what car James Dean died in, right? I mean, if any star died on a bike, you would have no idea which. But like so, there is this incredible attraction about cars. There's really like a strong car culture, and there's a positive side. There's also a negative side to it, but it's just true that they grab our attention, and so you have this huge revolution, compared to electric bikes. Electric cars uh, are, uninteresting compared to electric bikes in cities. Drones are completely irrelevant, but they're also sexy to talk about. So it's actually not that things aren't happening. It's just that our attention goes somewhere that's more entertaining than bikes, right?
Yeah, it almost makes you feel like there's a certain desire for science fictionification, if I coin that word, of
Yeah,
our society, right? And I love the ideas too, but if it's not practical, it's not practical, right?
yeah. But it's also that it's such an old object, right? Even if you look at an electric bike today, I mean, even though you can probably determine that it's electric, it more or less looks like a safety bike from around 1900, right? It's not like it's drastically different. So it's not really, it doesn't have that kind of appeal of being new and different, and it doesn't have that sexiness
Yeah,
that a lot of sci-fi does have, right? So it is
yeah. So moving briefly into the sci-fi part of this, um, so you have investigated um different forms of mobility. So I did see an article on vertical urban mobility that you wrote. And also, I'm very curious about electric vehicles. So, in one of my stories upcoming is it's set about 20 years in the future, where electric vehicles, so let's say electric car has evolved into more or less a moving room at that point. So I see potential, and now I do like electric bikes as well, but I see potential for electric cars in that they can become a traveling office, automated office, a family room, whatever. Do you think we'll see that evolution anytime soon, or will we just sort of supersede electric cars into something else? Maybe, flying drones. Will we elevate our levels? Because I mean, England itself has very relatively low buildings. I mean, we outside of London, it's really like a couple floors basically. We're not
yeah.
like New York at all or anything. So how do you see the the future of urban mobility in sort of that kind of, I guess, science fiction kind of direction?
Yeah. So I mean, a electric car being, self-driving electric car being more or less an apartment or pod that can go anywhere. Of course, I can see that happen. I mean, in theory, you could make it today, but again, I think we really have to distinguish in what type of environment is it. So if it's going from I don't know, a trans-Siberic office, it's not going to disturb anyone. It's perfect. But if you are in a city, it's a problem, right? Because I mean, when you talk about cars, a lot of people think the issue is just about these. Well, not I don't know if it's true, but at least a lot of kind of anti-car movement, so to say, has been about environmentalism. But even let's say you did not believe that there's any issue around there, then the most important, just from strictly transportation point of view, is flow of people. How many people can flow from A to B within X amount of time? So that's kind of that throughput is what you strictly speaking need to optimize. And with bikes, you can have a lot of bicycles, right? If you have one car, you probably have room for 10 bikes there, right? So when they go around, 4 people, you can have 10 cyclists. And the space that a car takes up is a problem. But it's not a problem that is big. The problem is that it's not small enough. It's not big enough, right? So if it was a bus, actually it becomes great. It becomes great again, because then you can have 58 people in there. Then you're fine. So it's they are hindrance to throughput. And so one of the things that people are trying, so there was this study at MIT many years ago now that said that and kind of funded by the car lobby. So it had, it was kind of interested in giving kind of a positive future outlook for cars. Was that, well, if you knew exactly where people were going and kind of you put that into a supercomputer and it really like optimized that flow. Let's say you didn't have even any red and green lights, because why would you? If they can move like a fish shoal, right? They can just go. They can kind of pass each other without having red or light and still not hitting each other. And that kind of super optimization. And they looked at, if you did that to make cars as efficient as you would with, let's say, buses or bicycles, you would actually end up with having to have at least 6 people in there. So, and you never have 6 people in cars, right? There, on average, you have 1.5, right? And why am I saying all of this? I'm saying that, okay, so one, if you really got to optimize for cars, actually you end up more with minibuses than with cars. But the problem with these driverless cars is that even though you can make a lot of things efficient, so for instance, you can also go much closer to the car in front of you. So instead of, let's say, having four cars, you could all of a sudden have 5 cars because they were squished together without the fear of them banging into each other, because when one breaks, the other one simultaneously breaks, etc. Then, but the problem is that you don't need a driver. So actually, from now having 1.5 person, on average, you could end up actually having half a person in the car, right? And you might say, instead of parking, I don't want to pay for parking, just drive around until I come back, right? Or now my dog needs to go to the hairdresser, and you put your dog in there, and the car drives the dog. And, so you end up in a situation where you could have, each have 3 cars out there just driving around without any people in it. And so that for cities would be like the worst thing that could happen. So that's just vis-a-vis this pod idea, right? I'm not saying there aren't scenarios where it can work, but just if you take cities as they are today and just put them in there, it would be it would be hell on earth.
That's
But,
interesting because some of the scenarios you note, I did actually have in the book as well. Literally, having the car drive around with no one in it just to avoid parking, etc. So that's interesting. It's also interesting that some of these solutions you mentioned, with more people in the minibuses, and these are kind of naturally developed in some countries. If you look at India with the bikes, I mean, they have maybe a 3-lane road, but they've got 7 lanes worth of bikes or scooters.
yeah, yeah,
And then in the Middle East, when I was in Israel, they had shroots. So naturally, they just evolved a service, which would they have like 10 or 12 people they'd pick up on a route kind of thing to make it more efficient. So it is interesting that some cultures sort of naturally evolved these higher throughput ways.
yeah. That's true.
Yeah,
That's true. But I think we've like a car centric culture is really like it's been a thing where they've been wanting it because if you had it, why can't we get it? And if you're so cool when you have one, why can't I be cool, right? It's yeah. But with regards to the drones, or you mentioned this urban mobility, three-dimensional urban mobility, and I think that is also a very relevant thing, because if you look at skyscrapers, they're not very, if there comes a point where they become inefficient because it costs a lot of money to have the elevators up, pump up the water, uh, put up the wiring. Th- they, they're not in themselves efficient skyscrapers. But if you look at New York, it's actually a very efficient, energy efficient city, and that's ironic, you would say, because there you have a lot of skyscrapers. But if there's a lot of skyscrapers and they start kind of being condensed, then all of a sudden the energy they become energy efficient, and so skyscrapers are in themselves not bad as long as just not one freestanding one, right? So
right. Okay.
if it's a city built around it. But the thing is, now you have a lot of new cities being built. So roughly from now on, and the rest of the century, we're going to have 1 billion more people on the African continent and 1 billion more people in Asia. Like really, give or take, but and the rest of the world kind of stays as it is. Um, and at the same time, you're going to have a lot of urbanization. So you have a lot of people moving into the cities, and if you take the African continent, it's not very urbanized yet. So I think in the Western Hemisphere, we're way beyond 50, probably nearing 60% of people living in the cities. Whereas for the African continent, it's above 30, but I don't think we're up at 40 yet, right? So if you have like already a lot of people plus 1 billion more people, and now they're going to move into cities, in flocks, there you're going to have some challenges, right? And so what some of these cities have started to do is just to build new skyscraper cities, like Cairo, the biggest city on that continent. They just built an extra city, right? They built an extra, and so you are building tall buildings. So and the thing with the tall building, then if you want to have things around you, if it takes you 10 minutes to go out to the street, then already you're behind, right? So it would be efficient if you could go without going down, right? So I think that this is the kind of thinking that will start to come in future cities, is we will need to build tall in some places, and we will need to make sure that the city actually that the mobility encompasses the three-dimensional space. Right now, you imagine the transport is something only when you come out of the door, right? But it's in theory, transport can be anywhere. And I think that is the positive thing that drones have contributed with to cities. I mean, you can see in the Ukraine war, they have a lot of other functionalities. So they have proven their worth many times, but now I'm speaking in cities themselves, right? And in cities themselves, they've actually turned out to be not very good because, well, for one, they're not energy. You want energy efficient things in the city. They're not energy efficient. Uh, Basically, if I have to stand, it's not so hard. If I have to jump all the time, it's hard, right? It needs to kind of stay up in the air, and to stay up in the air, it needs to propulse air downwards. So, which means that there's noise pollution, and also, basically you've got a fan on top of your head. Like if you look New York, I don't know, I've mentioned New York a lot of times, but they looked at having more helicopters. They instead it went the other way. They started really restricting them because they're a nuisance to people. That's what drones are, at least, specific types of them. And also they are dangerous. Airplanes are not at all dangerous because the safety built around them is so much superior to what's built around cars. So it's not dangerous in theory to fly above a city, but a drone is roughly as safe as a car. Not safety is the wrong word, but as reliable as a car, right? I have tried to shut down in a car and just have a motor stop. I've never tried that in the plane, but if you imagine every time you had that motor stop, what happens with the drone is it falls down from the sky, right? Your car just stays put.
Yeah.
So they're very dangerous. So there's this movement to try and use drones in cities, which I don't think is very interesting. I'm not saying, you could have maybe people flying from the countryside in with a drone. I don't see that's a problem, but within the city, I think it's hard to imagine unless something changes drastically that I haven't predicted. But the genius about what they go around and say is that they actually discovered that cities are three-dimensional spaces and not two-dimensional spaces, right? So that's the genius, and not the challenge that they identified is the genius, not the solution that they provided for cities. So I think we're going to see a lot of different solutions. How do we get from floor number 49 in this building to floor number 32 in that other building, right? So this is where we need to come up with things.
Right. And this kind of, I don't know if there's a clunky segue or not, but this kind of leads us into an involvement potentially for science fiction writers as well. So you have a book, Expand, Stretching the Future by Design, which we're not going to go into a lot of detail on. It's a tour de force summary of how design can affect basically everything in the world, essentially. So when I was preparing for this interview, I did go through the book and I was jotting notes, and I think I had, I don't know, didn't even count the number of pages of notes, and I just said, no, this isn't reasonable. I have to come up with a different approach. But one of the things that was interesting along the lines we're just talking about is the book very early on mentions how science fiction authors, collaborations with science fiction authors, can aid in the design, or at least design ideas. And I was curious if you've approached many science fiction authors, because I've happened to have interviewed two recently who would probably fit into there somehow. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that also, just the fact of narrative as a tool within society as well, which I think is also hinted at or even directly mentioned in several points. And so is that something you pursue at the moment still?
Well, I really believe that science fiction is important, and I can see that kind of kinship. I have not spoken to science fiction, or I've bumped into, but I haven't like spoken seriously about this to science fiction. Also, I spoke at some point to a Hollywood producer who really was believing in this, and tried to kind of talk it up and make it into something over there. But I don't know how much success. I haven't spoken to her for since COVID, I think. So I don't know how successful she was in that. but I think that kind of thing where you project a future and then kind of count backwards. How did you get there? That is a much more interesting way of changing things or improving things than just stacking up, right? That's what we often happen to do. If you take bicycles, like it was so weird when I came into this world of, okay, now, you went from 9 gears to 18 gears and then from 18 to 27, and you were like, what's the progress here? Like, what's and so just this kind of incremental, I mean, of course, you also need that. You need to optimize things, but it's just not really what's going to massively change the world, right? So, and I do think science fiction does have that power. Of course, science fiction is many things, many different genres. I'm not sure space opera is going to, but again, you have Star Trek and even Star Wars that probably have influenced some very specific things. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've got to say, I literally only use one gear on my bike. I just put it in the gear I like and leave it there the whole time.
I do
Um,
the same.
it is interesting. So with science fiction authors, the world building, I think, is where it really applies well. And for example, so to two people I've interviewed recently, Stephen Oram in London, who's working with applied science fiction projects. So where he actually talks with researchers at the university and basically uses the narrative of science fiction to share their ideas. And then Alan Stroud is he's a lecturer with Coventry, and what he's actually specialist in world building. So he's actually been on some horizon future scanning projects for the UK government specifically for that reason. So it is I mean it is something that does happen, yeah. And I don't know, maybe there's a future in that for science fiction writers as well these days.
Yeah, I think it's a way to contribute. I mean, I think they automatically do so by writing these books. If they're good enough, it's going to propagate, and people have these get these ideas from them, right? So I think you can actually point to many things. I mean, if you look at now I mentioned Star Trek. If you take the Motorola, what was it called, Tech, like it's almost the Star Trek thing, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, a communicator, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right? So there are things I think like, okay, so how do I make it? And there is this movement. I forget his name now, but I also mentioned him in the book. He was one of the early cyberpunk guys. I forget his name, but he has been part of having this whole um, uh, uh, design movement that uses science fiction in a very specific way, where you basically invent a thing that does not happen. I mean, it could have been that communicator, now it's too late. But and then imagine the world just with this little thing. And just, by having one thing that doesn't exist in the world, all of a sudden it kind of bounces, your ideas, and oh, then I would change this, then I would do this. And then you can create really multiple scenarios by that. And you do get locked in. And to I don't think people really realize to the degree we get locked in by things around us, right? If you take now, we're using digital tools right now, but people assume that it not only that it is, of course, because it is digital, but also that it could only have been digital, what we're experiencing now, right? It could have happened in many other ways, right? We could have we didn't need to make something digital for this to happen, right? It could be in the future that we would communicate in via biology or neurons, rather than these zero and ones electric impulses, right? So that's also why people get so surprised when things shift, right? And AI, we couldn't really have, now that I think today in Financial Times, they were out and where some big time fund managers in England actually are saying, okay, we think now that these magnificent seven, they can't have these huge gains anymore, because basically they're being outplayed by AI, and who would have thought that, right? I mean, that they it's people just project what is kind of linearly long into the future, always too long.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting too, because we also we live in a world where we do take a lot of this for granted. And one thing that's interesting to me is that um we have these technologies, we think, okay, the world is this way, we're we're living this way, and there are other options, like you say, right? So the technologies we have now are very impermanent. We live in probably the most fragile, well, I think undoubtedly the most fragile society that's ever existed in humanity. Um, and all the things we store, all the selfies, all, all the conversation, all the books, everything can be gone. And even the computers, like you mentioned, I think it was mentioned in the book as well, but there's also like there are biological ways of doing computing. There's, I think NASA explored biorhodopsin for data storage. But speaking of data storage, then you've got a video I saw recently talking about mythology and cultural stories as ways of storing information, right? So we look at them as mythology, but we're finding more and more that they align with actual events of the past. And so they're discovering that there's storytelling is probably one of the most robust forms of information storage if it's done properly, right?
Oh,
So just it's just fascinating things like that. Um, and that doesn't really segue into AI, but you did mention AI, and I wanted to get into it. So,
okay, okay.
um, so moving into AI, what I did want to ask is how is AI changing the world of design thinking?
Yeah, that's actually like I can see that in one of my companies where they will work for very big companies. For instance, they will make a lot of the business to business digital infrastructure for Amazon. There's like they work with really big players, and the way that they use it is really to prototype, right? So with design, it's all about prototyping. Well, it's not all about, but it's projecting this future, this vision, and then prototyping what could it become, blah blah, and that prototyping bit you can really speed up. Um, and it's not only, I mean, it's different phases of it, right? So you also need to do research. So what if you went into, I don't know, Malaysia? What would happen then, and which other like, so you can all simulate so many things, both from like market research, from how it actually would look, how it would work, how yeah, so it's actually applied a lot. Of course, if you, I mean, if as a designer, if you see someone that doesn't know design having just asked an AI to do it for them, we can see it, right? I mean, it's so clearly you have a big advantage in actually being professional, right? But it does really speed things up.
And you do have to be careful of the assumptions you make when you're designing, especially I guess through AI, which would be an accelerating force or factor. I'm thinking, of course, because we did touch on COVID, and so my background's biochemistry, and in hindsight, especially, but even at the time, there was some very obviously, I think, poor assumptions made in the vaccine development, for example, that have proven to be fairly disastrous for many people. So it's very easy to make certain, and I believe there are certain assumptions that were made in the development pathway of that seemed obvious, but there was something that was overlooked at the end, basically. Um,
Oh, so what's that? I'm just curious.
so what I think is they were looking at how do you get vaccines developed faster, right? So the main part is you have to test them in humans, takes 10 years. And the main reason for that is every single time you create a vaccine, it's a new virus. You have to kill, the attenuated virus. So I think the assumption that was made was, okay, we have this system where we have to test the delivery matrix, the support structure of the virus every single time we make a new vaccine because it's different every time. How do you stabilize the virus? So if we can have a common delivery system then we have a common matrix. We don't have to test. We have to test only once. And then all you have to do is put, the RNA for the protein, for the antigen protein in. And I think what was missed was that's true. But then what was missed was then it was assumed, oh, well, we just have a delivery mechanism and an antigen and we're fine. But they missed the fact that the delivery mechanism is now non-specific, goes all over the body. And then therefore you have to test the effects of the antigen everywhere in the body, right? So these, I think, were overlooked, especially with the spike protein from the COVID virus, so the SARS virus.
Yeah.
And so it ends up in places they didn't expect it to go, right? Because they just weren't considering that as a possibility. It seems to me, maybe they were, and they just were like, okay, the governments are giving us a pass, so we'll just put it out. I don't know. But it seems like there was a design structure or feature overlooked there.
And what would they do in the future? Because I mean, the situation will probably, it's going to be
Yes.
relevant again, right? I
So
mean,
that it's a challenge with the mRNA vaccines, isn't it? Like you basically want to get them much more specific in their delivery. Um, how you might do that, yeah, there's right now, difficult to say, right? The
yeah.
other option is you really have to test much more than they are now. So you can use the same system, but you've still got to do years of testing still. You're not going to shortcut it that much, really.
Yeah.
So there's fundamental issues that, you see, when you try to solve one problem, you end up creating another problem, right?
Yeah, I can see that. I mean,
Yeah.
I was not, in the beginning, I was really wary about, I was surprised the RNA vaccines were the successful ones, actually. I actually thought the Russian one would be the good one.
I'm curious how much money had to do with that as well.
Okay, yeah, okay.
That's yeah, but again, I don't know. I'm not inside the pharmaceutical industry,
Yeah.
or the powers, the halls of power. So I just know that, for example, Pfizer was everywhere in their advertising and has a huge budget for that kind of thing.
Mm.
So yeah, sometimes money just wins, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to say. Yeah. So one thing I was wondering, so incorporating AI into design, and now one of the things you look at is sustainability, effects on climate. You want to try and design for a better future. There's a significant cost to AI that's kind of being talked about behind the scenes. It doesn't seem to be sort of pushed into the mainstream, and that is partially environmental. Obviously, the data centers, using all water and electricity and things like that, and then partially the human side of it, because there's basically, I would call them training farms. Sometimes it's delocalized, like in the US, but then in places like Kenya, for example, they just have, warehouses of people
Yeah,
inputting information, right? So
it's
there's a
true.
human cost. Now maybe in places like Kenya, I don't know, that's actually a good paying job, but in the US, it's driving people crazy. Like these like all hours of the day jobs you got to jump on or you'll miss it kind of thing. And so there's very real costs behind the use of AI as well. Is that something that you've considered factoring into sustainability and future design?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, in terms of the data center, I think there are really good solutions um, for recycling heat, right? Like there's some countries where you don't have a lot of district heating, but in Denmark, for instance, there's a very developed district heating. So all the surplus energy basically is free energy to people. Kind of like, well, people have to pay for it, but I mean, it's like the source is free, right? In a way, or it can be that they can make it into a business. So the sustainability impact can be diminished. I'm not saying there's not one, right? But it's a real challenge. But I mean, it's as with everything we feel we need. Uh, Either we should change our opinion or we need to find a solution, right? And but I think there are solutions, right?
Yeah.
The With regards to the human impact, that I have to say I don't have a real good answer to. I mean, the more they can kind of distribute it, so the more I could spend 5 minutes here and there rather than a few specific people spending 100% of their time, probably the better. You could probably distribute that better. So they're I can imagine that they are their solutions. But I mean, it is a problem also what data you feed into them. And I mean, it comes with so many problems, AI, and we're probably only scratching the surface of what we can get out of it. But certainly there are challenges ahead of us.
Yeah, we have entered a very interesting time in human history.
Yeah.
So we are getting towards the end of our time. I had a couple big questions that I'd like to ask at the end, and then we'll finish up. I guess the first one is, if you're designing pretty much anything, you're designing for the future and you're designing with a goal in mind or a future view in mind. And so taking the science fiction perspective, and I've asked people this many times without too many interesting answers, I think, but how do you view humanity in 1,000 years? That's a long time in the future, but I'm kind of interested in, I suppose, either a goal or a direction you think humanity's moving in. What's the ultimate, like, what is our reason for doing this if we look forward 1,000 years? If we're all extinct at that point, it doesn't really matter, does it?
I hope we're not. But I mean, I do imagine that we will have to move into space. And so I think just from a hedging perspective, I mean, it's not, so people talk, oh, if you go into space, then it means you don't care about the planet, blah, blah. But I don't see those as opposites at all. For one, you can learn from space how kind of to deal with planets, including your own. And we can't go into space now. We're not there yet, right? So we got to take care of the Earth in the meantime, because if we die, we're not going to go out to space. But and then of course the question becomes when do we then start? Let's say some people go very far away. Do we then start to become two different species at some point, right? I mean, 1,000 years is not a long time. I mean, sounds like a long time, but in terms of evolution, it's not super long, right? 1,000 years ago, they were probably exactly like us. So, but I think humanity will have to kind of diversify, not only diversify in terms of where we live, other planets, but I think probably also the human race will become different things, different animals.
So that's actually interesting because you've touched on both my last two questions.
Okay, okay.
So I do agree. So I guess the next question is, we do have to go off Earth, I think, to have long-term survival. So being a designer, design thinker, what considerations should we incorporate as we approach the design of systems that we'll need to travel there or to survive on other planets, like, for example, Mars or even the moon?
So I think we there's one of in this expansion or expand book that I wrote with Christian Basin. It's there's one of our expansion things is called time, and in time I have or we have an example that I really like. It's the moonshot. Kennedy's moonshot is really famous for, here you set a goal and it's really far in the future. It's 10 years and then you achieve it. But actually the people working in NASA back then, with a lot of Nazi heritage, by the way, not that it matters, but it was a lot of these old guys standing there. For them, it was like 10 years is just around the corner, right? They were looking at way further ahead. They were not interested in the moon. They were interested in Mars. So when Kennedy came and said, now in 10 years, you got to deal with the moon, they're like, okay, so this means we got to scrape everything we've been doing to get to Mars and now start over for a puny project, right? So I think that kind of like having the right time perspective is really key to a lot of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess the final question, which does relate to some degree of time and also our changing nature. So I happen to believe that right now we're at a point where, in order to move forward, our human nature itself may have to change. And this is not just human nature, but nature, like the nature instincts that have evolved through a survival-based evolutionary system. And I think we're at that point. Like, I think that's part of what the declining birth rates relate to. So that means that we're effectively changing the nature of ourselves, which will take us away from who we are, including a lot of, fundamental parts. And I guess the question is, well, what I've got down here is, who are we designing it for? Like, the beings that may move forward, many of us now would maybe not want to be or would not recognize, and they might have different goals, but we still need to get past this hurdle somehow. Now, I don't know, maybe you don't accept that position, but does that seem like a consideration?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's also a super difficult question.
These are the big questions.
But there is this English physicist, and actually I mentioned him briefly in the book, but he's really out there, and he basically talks about how existence is, the fact that there are living things is such a an extraordinary thing. And that basically the essence is creativity, and creativity is also today mainly driven by humans, creativity, and so actually he thinks the purpose of humans is to make sure the universe does never cease to exist, and that kind of this entropy or whatever, that at some point we would become nothing. This is what we as humans need to find the key to stopping. And so I think that's if I had to design humans to do anything, I think I'll probably design us to basically find that key to creativity, which actually kind of is the author of life, let's say.
That's interesting. So basically holding on to the intangibles that sort of set us aside from, like, the average animal, for example, that make us a bit special in as far as we know in the universe. Yeah. No, that's a great answer. And it's a good one to end on, I think.
At least a fairly spacey one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we are out of time. It has been great chatting with you. I was just wondering, before you go, if you wanted to plug any of your socials or contact information, and perhaps let us know if there's any projects you're working on right now.
Yeah, I mean, right now the BiOmega bikes are biomega.co before they're .com, so people get confused. So I think biomega.co, to check out the bikes. I think that's what I would point towards. I'm doing some other stuff, but it's slightly political and so on, so I'm not gonna flash that.
Okay, that's excellent. Jens Martin Skibsted, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was super entertaining, I think.
And thank you for listening. Information and links related to this and all episodes are available at alternatefutures.co.uk. I'm also over at Substack under Alternate Futures, where I post articles on science fiction, socio-technological issues, and futurism. You can subscribe for free or sign up for a paid account if you'd like to support the podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, why not share it? And if you know a world shaper who you think might be a fit for the podcast, send me a message at podcast@alternatefutures.co.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank you for listening, and I hope you'll join me on the next episode.
This is the future. Human error. Evolution. This is the future.